Hello, magical people. In today's video, we're going to look at qualities or states of mind you should cultivate to get the most out of your magical practice, no matter what tradition or style you prefer. Some of them might surprise you. If you decide to take up practical enchantment, or if you already have a practice, there are certain qualities and modes of thinking you can cultivate that will vastly improve your workings and help you avoid a lot of pitfalls. Number one, cultivate flexibility. No, not that kind of flexibility. Flexibility is the ability to grow, adjust, and change over time based on new information or experiences. Rigidity and dogmatic thinking are surprisingly common in magical communities and the source of endless, convoluted, and often pointless arguments. Cultivating flexibility in your thinking will help you avoid that nonsense. Let's look at an example of what I mean by flexibility. You're booked to do a tarot reading at a local occult shop. Your client says she's feeling blah and uninspired, finds herself sitting around bored and listless, watching reruns of home and garden television and wishing she could find something to alleviate her ennui. She wonders if a tarot card reading might offer some inspiration. You draw the Nine of Swords. The Nine of Swords, that's an air card, Mars and Gemini, the second deckhand to be exact, and Mercury is its ruling planet, but it's a 9, so that's Yesod on the Tree of Life. I think that's the moon. Well, basically, you've been troubled, overwhelmed by anxiety, probably having insomnia. Am I right?
Not really.
Oh, well. But let's just say, instead, when you get to the shop, you realize you've forgotten your favorite tarot deck, and the owner of the store is sold out except for this old, weird Tarot of Marseille. So what do? You take it, you shuffle the cards, and again, the Nine of Swords. But it looks like this. What do? Some people just go blank. There is no picture. How are you supposed to read a card when it doesn't have a picture on it? You might default to your pre-programmed memory bank of associations. Air card, Mars and Gemini, Mercury, Yesod on the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, and then you think of the picture from the Waite-Smith deck of the person sitting up, head in hands, having a horrible nightmare with those terrifying swords hanging nearby. What if instead you let go of all of that and looked at the card on the table with flexibility and openness and let your creative imagination take control? Well, there's a sword in the middle and it's surrounded by a bunch of other swords that look kind of like a fence. So maybe you're feeling kind of fenced in and stuck. And at the top, the swords all kind of come together, kind of like they're woven, almost like some sort of fabric. And the central sword is piercing it like a knitting needle.
You mean like knitting or needlepoint or crochet?
Sure, I guess that makes sense.
That is so wild. I used to do a lot of needlepoint and crocheting and knitting, but once I started my new job, I just put all that stuff away. When I used to do it, it was so relaxing and really scratched that creative itch that I've been missing in my life. Oh my God, you are so good. Can I book another reading for next week?
Now, you might think that's a silly example, and maybe it is, but sometimes tarot readings are ridiculously literal. And if you're a reader, you know exactly what I mean. The point is this. Don't get so wedded to a particular system or way of thinking or set of correspondences that it inhibits your natural creativity. Cultivate flexibility and openness to allow your creative imagination to expand and grow into your practice. Number 2, be curious about history. I do lots of talks on tarot history, and when I teach tarot classes, I always teach the history first. Why? Because knowing your history prevents you from spreading bullshit history, and there is a lot of it out there. But more importantly, knowing your history makes you a better reader. Let's go back to the previous reading. All that stuff about Mars and Gemini and Yesod and Mercury is the ruling planet. That's what the Nine of Swords means, right? Well, yes, if you're going by the rules made up by a bunch of esoteric Freemasons in the 18th and 19th centuries, who incorporated them into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn's complex, convoluted, and often historically dubious curriculum that ended up as the basis for the Waite-Smith Tarot and all the bajillion clones of it that came afterwards. Full disclosure, I'm an esoteric Freemason and have nothing against esoteric Freemasonry. Right, brothers? Before all those esoterically inclined gentlemen of wealth and leisure made those astrological and Kabbalistic and alchemical associations, they were not part of tarot. Tarot was a game that originated in 15th century Italy. Astrology, Kabbalah, alchemy, Hermeticism, and all that stuff was not baked into the cards. All of that was added hundreds of years later by men who in many ways lacked knowledge of history and just basically made stuff up. Shh, here's a secret. All magic is made up, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't use the Golden Dawn system. It may work spectacularly well for you. It works well for many people and has for a very long time. But projecting your memorized meanings and associations from the Waite-Smith deck onto a tarot from hundreds of years earlier makes no sense. It would be like using your Prius manual to learn how to drive a horse and carriage. It just doesn't make sense. It's anachronistic. But if you know your history, that opens up all sorts of insights and novel ways of thinking. Let's stick with the tarot for a few minutes and look at the Hanged Man. Here's a common definition you can find online. The Hanged Man is the card that suggests ultimate sacrifice, surrender, or being suspended in time. And when we look at the card in the Waite-Smith deck, the Hanged Man has a halo around his head. So he's clearly some sort of spiritual being, sacrificing himself, or perhaps withdrawing from the world at large, hanging upside down to get a different perspective on the world around him. And if you read tarot cards, you probably use some variant of that meaning. I know I do. I'm not here to judge. But if you study tarot history, you'll discover that the Hanged Man in 15th century Italy, where tarot cards originated, would be understood as someone guilty of treason, a traitor. People condemned as traitors in that era were hanged by one foot, just like the Hanged Man. There were paintings in public places known as shame paintings or pittura infamante, showing people hanged just like the Hanged Man by one foot. Anyone playing the game of tarocchi in Italy in that era would see the image for what it was. Not an enlightened being offering himself in surrender and sacrifice, but a shameful traitor. So what does knowing that history do for your divination? I would say it greatly expands how you see the card, opening up all sorts of new and interesting avenues for interpretation. It widens your conception of what that card might mean in any particular reading. So learn your history. Take the time to learn where your practice came from, and it will help you avoid spreading fake history. And more importantly, it will deepen your practice. Number 3, learn how to handle paradoxes. Yes, Mercury is a baked, barren, lifeless rock orbiting the sun. And Mercury is also a trickster and a god of commerce and communication. And he's also Hermes, and he's a myth. But myths are in some sense real. And what exactly is real? And if something is not real, how can it still have real effects and work? And if this sort of thing melts your brain down, maybe you should take up another hobby, like knitting. Number 4, Skepticism. It may seem weird that I'm a guy who writes about and makes videos about practical magic, and I'm advocating for skepticism. But like Rule 3 says, get used to paradoxes. Without skepticism, you will always be easy game for grifters and con artists, and the magical world is rife with people ready to rip you off and indoctrinate you into their cult. As Robert Anton Wilson wisely counseled, always question the belief systems or BS others are trying to feed you. And that includes my BS. Just as importantly, never forget to question your own BS. Learning to say, I don't know, is difficult, very difficult, but it's essential to avoid getting locked into dogma and rigidness that will stifle your magical growth. Learn to be okay with not having answers to all the questions. As the brilliant poet and magical thinker Rainer Maria Rilke once said, try to love the questions. Make that your motto. So there we are. 4 essential qualities to cultivate to get the most out of your magical practice, whether you're a beginner or a seasoned practitioner. In the next video, we'll get down to some practical, nitty-gritty magical work. So please subscribe so you don't miss any episodes and share with your magically inclined friends. Thanks again and see you next time.